Hello and welcome to Grease Garage, and as you can see, these have seen better days. So we're going to strip them back, paint them up and make them look like new, and I'm going to show you guys how to do it. So for you guys that have been following the Turbo Pajero project, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you do see it. These are off that engine and we need to clean these up and modify them a bit for Josh's catch can. But before we do, let's have a quick look at Josh's amazing paint he's done. Yes, it just scratches straight off, and that's how you know it wasn't done properly. So the first thing we gotta do is clean these up, get the oil off them, and we're also gonna remove this paint. So let's get into it. As you can see, we have some automotive paint stripper. If you haven't used this before, it is highly recommended that you wear some gloves. Otherwise, your fingers are going to mount off. And who wants to be known as a little stumpy? Definitely not a great name to be introduced to your future Mrs. or Mr. Mistake. Anyways, you want to plop this stuff on and use a paintbrush to spread it. And if this is not working great, you can help it along with a heat gun or a hairdryer, just to make it react a bit better. And for anything left, you can use a brass wire wheel and get off any stubborn paint. Alright, so I'm just spraying some oil onto these so they don't start rusting while I do my very next step, which is, because this is going on to that Turbo Pajero project, we need to hook in some of these. And this is going to be for the catch can. So when this engine's breathing, it has somewhere to go. So we're going to chop these all up. We're going to modify a couple of things. We're going to remove these little clips for the spark ignition leads. And yeah, then we're going to start prepping and painting. But first, we're going to start chopping. So let's get onto it. Okay, so I've nicked this tool off my mum and it has made my life so much easier. Google calls it a finger sander, old mate Bunnings calls it a file sander. Whatever it is called, it makes my life so much easier and it thins this piece of metal out with little effort. To the point I can use a pair of pliers and snap it off and then slowly grind it flat. Notice at the last bit how I level off that sander with the rocky cover, so I don't dig too deep into the metal surface. I then repeat this on both sides, then bring out the big old air saw, and then cut off the old breather tubes on the end and then sand them flat. Now, seems that I live in a small city, getting automotive parts can sometimes be a real bother, but lucky we have a couple hydraulic places that are a great source for AN style fittings. And that's what I have here. So I need to lay this down and get it ready so I can weld this onto that rocky cover. It's time to start getting serious. I'm using a bolt and a nut to hold this fitting into place on the rocky cover so it doesn't move when I start to weld. Because I've decided to go old school and bring out the blowtorch, the flux and the solder and braze these all together. Now, brazing is an art form in itself, but a very easy one to do and a great skill to learn. Basically, you just want to heat up that thicker piece of metal first till you see it just starting to change colour. When it starts turning red, you want to move the flame around so you start heating up the thinner piece of metal while still keeping most of that heat on that thicker section. I dip my stick of solder into the flux, and then what I do is I'm passing over that metal surface where I want to weld, and the flux will just spread out. Once the heat is right, I will start to add a little bit of solder, and as you will start to notice, as I move in the flame, the solder will follow the heat. This will help get a smoother finish. So where that breather hole was, we need to weld that section up as well. So we're filling it in, and that's a pretty basic thing to do. All you gotta do is have heat control. So we heat that section of metal up to temp and place the solder on top of it. And as it melts, we then fan the heat on and off so that solder slowly melts in there, and you can see that's coming up pretty good. You want to try to build it higher than the metal surface around it, so once it's cooled down naturally, you can start sanding. I'm using the finger sander to flatten it down as much as I can before then making a sanding block out of some hard plastic and then folding the sandpaper around it to get the soldering spot level with the metal surface. The sandpaper I'm using is 280 grit, so it takes a little bit longer than usual, but it still gives a good finish. The next bit was a little hard to do, and I was pretty much stuck doing this by hand. Because of where it was really hard to get any tool in there and to fix it up. I tried the Dremel and legit it was a lot quicker by hand as I didn't have the correct grinding bit, something I will need to buy in future. But I got it done, and then I drilled the hole out in the rocky cover and then used the air grinder to grind out that hole to the correct size. Alright, so I've finished modifying and I've finished cleaning it. So what I've done is I've gone inside and out and really gone through it and cleaned all the old oil off, any grease or muck, got it out of the way and let it dry, and then I've gone over the top with thinners, ditched that rag and then used a new rag and went over it with thinners again. So I'm using multi-purpose thinners and that just seems to give me the best results. So this should be ready now to etch prime. So let's get to it. Time to put some etch primer on, which will give us a good base to start with. A couple of no-brainers here though. You really don't want to paint the threads of multiple layers of paint. So I'm taping up anything that has a thread. Next thing I want to tape up is where the oil cap connects to the rocky cover. I'm leaving this section paint free because it's most likely that this is going to be saturated with oil, and this being acrylic paint that we're using, it probably will break down. You want to start your first coat off extremely light and you should be able to see the metal still. On this can, it recommends you wait between 1 to 2 minutes between coats. And each coat you can make it a little thicker than the last. But try not to go overboard on etch primer. You should not be getting any runs and continue to shake the can between sprays. Well, it's a new day and as you can see by this other one, it is looking really well. Cleaned up really nice, and we just sprayed that with a bit of putty spray just to build it up a little bit so we can sand it all down and make it look good, ready for painting. Now, as you can see, this one here did not turn out very good. It looks horrible, but I'm going to show you this after a couple of scratch ups, some sanding, a little bit of prep. This is going to look just as good as the other one. Let's get into it. You might be wondering what is happening. Well, it was all bad judgment of height, you see. As I pulled the solder away, I dragged it along the rocky cover and it melted where I didn't want it to. And because I tried to fix it with heat, I made it worse. So let my stuff up be your lesson. But I am lucky though. The rocky cover didn't have the right amount of heat in it, so that solder hasn't bonded properly. So the brass will knock a lot of it off, and I can also clean up some of that flux at the same time, so winning there. I then get my old mate the finger sander and then smooth out any big sections that aren't close to being right. I am now turned to the Dremel. As I mentioned before, I don't have the right grinding tip, but I have found an engraver that is just going to let me do the corners and smooth out any sections I can't do with my hands. And now we've got the second one ready to be painted. There's something I'd really like to mention real quickly. If you were using this on a standard system where this is going back into the intake, this is definitely not the way to do it. The reason why is because we are bypassing all the baffling that's in this rocket cover, and if you're making it go back through your engine, you want at least some sort of baffle. So this has to go to a catch can. You can go to a catch can, then back into your air intake, that'd be perfectly fine, but I just want to point that out real quickly because that does make a lot of sense if you think about it. So, like I said, that is ready. That is pretty good. No bog. Let's put some paint on it. So same as before, we do 1 coat, 2 coats, 3 coats, and then the last one, once those first 3 are done, is we're doing the putty coat. Now the putty coat you can put on quite thick, and you can do as many coats as you like until you are happy with the thickness. So again, another day, and these are now dry, so time to get sanding, and pretty much I'm positive that once I've sanded these, they're going to be ready for paint. So let's stop mucking around and get this ready. So let's start with the sanding block and focus on those flat surfaces. I'm making sure not to push too hard on the sanding block, as this putty primer, when it is dry, it is pretty soft and I don't want to take any big chunks out of the paint. This stuff is so handy to take out any little imperfections like deep scratches and small indents. And if you find you haven't filled the imperfection in, you can just wipe it down, do another couple of coats and sand it again. Once all flat surfaces are done, I then move over to the curved stuff and then rip small sections of sandpaper and then use my fingers to get into the tight grooves. I'm still using 280 grit sandpaper, so this does take a little longer than normal, which leaves a great surface for the next coat of paint, which is primer filler. I'm just using this as undercoat for two reasons. One, it makes the whole surface one color, and two, it's a high build primer. And anything I have missed, imperfection wise, should be filled up with this. And all that's left to do is paint it. So the color I have picked is Midnight Purple 3. Probably the most well-known purple paint for a car. Probably because it came on the GTR Skylines. And the reason I chose it, well, it was pretty much the only color I could think of that was purple when I was in the paint shop. Now my hopes are not super high for this coming out looking like the real Midnight Purple. It seems it's coming out of a can, but regardless, it should look pretty good. Now, same as before, you want to do a very, very light coat for your first layer. And every coat onwards, you want to spray a thicker coat. I ended up doing 4 coats of paint on each rocky cover, which used up about 90% of the can. And with the paint being wet, it really does look good. And there we go. This is the end results of all of our hard work. This has been dry for 4 days, no clear coat, no bog, just straight out of the can. And I reckon that is pretty decent to think about it. So yeah, they have definitely come up pretty good. Do they look like Midnight Purple 3? Leave in the comments, let me know what you think. I mean, there is definitely a bit of a color shift there if I can get it in the light. So yeah, it'd be great to hear from you. Next episode, we are actually putting these on the Turbo Pajero. Great project, so if you want to watch that, please subscribe, share to your mates, and put a thumbs up because it all helps with the show. And talking about the show, that's the end of this episode. So I will see you guys on the next one.